In the previous episode, we saw how Zhang Hong revealed to Tian Ran about the existence of a hidden beast king in the city with the help of some humans. He also explained that he was going to be arrested for causing serious consequences and negative social impacts. He also revealed to everyone that military regions were going to take control of cities in the future, so he asked Tian Ran to join the police force to obtain a privileged identity and have access to special powers. Tian Ran asked for several days to think about them, and after Yuan returned the sword to him, he saw how several members belonging to the parliament had been arrested because they had participated in the buying and selling of humans. Tian Ran returned to the estate, and after applying the growth agent to the sacred fruit of divine level, he sat down with Han Han and asked her if she would support her brother if he joined the police force. She replied yes because she didn't want her brother to give up something he wanted to do for her. She thought that she had been a burden on him since 3 years ago. He had quit his job to take care of her and the farm. Tian Ran gave her a hug and asked her not to think about those things, since everything he had done had been by his own decision. A man wearing a black suit arrived at the prison where Xiao Shen was. The man handed him a mutant egg, and without thinking twice, he ate it. The next day, Tian Ran pricked Xiao Bai's shoulder with a blood collection needle to extract a little bit of blood. He approached Lan Ning, and while staring into his eyes, he handed him the blood sample and explained that this was the sample he had promised to him and his boss Bai. Lan Ning took the blood sample and thanked him. Then, as he touched his glasses with his left hand, he stared at Xiao Bai and asked Tian Ran if this was the perfect mutant monster. He also added that it didn't seem to have drastic changes in its body or vital signs like the other Beast Kings. He came to the conclusion that Xiao Bai was not as powerful as the other Beast Kings. Upon hearing this, Xiao Bai started looking at him aggressively. Tian Ran looked into his eyes and explained to him that perfect mutation had many directions. He also added that the mutation directions of existing Beast Kings were not necessarily correct. He also asked Lan Ning if the correct path towards perfect mutation was simply increasing power, or changing physical form or intellectual growth. He revealed to him that the address of the variation was different, so naturally it seemed impossible for it to be completely consistent. While touching his glasses with his hand, Lan Ning replied that he was correct and also added that he had jumped to hasty conclusions. He explained to him that the genetic makeup of each organism was different, even though the same perfect genes was used in different organisms and could have different effects. Tian Ran put his hands in his pockets and while looking into his eyes, asked about Bai's health status. Upon hearing this, Lan Ning began to touch his head and change the topic of conversation. Then he asked Tian Ran if he had destroyed another sect and gotten into trouble again. He also added that if he didn't deliver the blood sample soon, Bai would scold him a lot. Seeing that Lan Ning didn't want to talk about Bai's health condition, Tian Ran simply decided to stop discussing the matter. At the same time, in the laboratories where Bai was located, several doctors performed an operation on him to remove his bone spurs. However, once the operation was over, they saw that the bone spurs had grown back in less than 30 minutes after being removed. Now, compared to before, they were growing faster, so the doctors came to the conclusion that it was impossible to remove the bone spurs through surgery. While Bai was lying on the stretcher, he slightly opened his eyes and saw the 3 doctors talking about him. At that moment, someone addressed Bai as boss and caught his attention. With the little strength he had left, he looked in the direction where the voice came from. The person who had called him was none other than Lan Ning. While holding a suitcase, he stared at Bai and the doctors and explained that he had returned with the blood samples. Upon hearing this, Bai slowly began to rise from the stretcher and stared into his eyes, asking the doctors to analyze the sample as soon as possible since he only had 24 hours left to live. The scientists took the sample and started analyzing it. Several hours later, a scientist went to Bai's room and used a giant hologram screen to explain that there were changes in the arrangement of the 20th pair of chromosomes. He also added that according to the analysis of blood cells, Xiao Bai's skeletal density was more than 10 times that of ordinary dogs, and he also had 79 chromosomes, one more than the average for dogs. Bai simply stayed listening to the scientist's explanation without saying anything. Several seconds later, he smiled and while looking at the screen, he realized that Xiao Bai had unlocked the genetic code. Another scientist approached him and explained that the chromosome was going to greatly increase size, strength, speed, and bone density. The other scientist explained that this extra chromosome could almost be called divine. Upon hearing this, Bai's expression changed drastically as he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He got up from the stretcher and approached the screen, and one of the scientists explained to him that these genes were the genes of a perfect mutant, not genetically altered material in these creatures created by the virus in V form. The other scientist also approached him and explained that although the success rate was not as high, they could try to replicate it. Upon hearing this, Bai began to stare at the ground and ordered the scientists to replicate the genes right away. At the same time on the farm, Tian Ran went to the orchard, and a system window informed him that level 4 cherry tomato had entered its ripening stage, and also asked him to verify crop analysis. Upon seeing this, Tian Ran requested an analysis from the system, and another status window appeared above the tomato plants. These plants were level 4 divine cherry tomato profit plants, with a growth rate of 95%. The growth status was good, and the time to maturity was 8 hours. While he was looking at the system window, he was surprised because now he could see the effect of a divine fruit in its ripening stage. He asked for information from the system, causing several windows to appear. The system informed him that there were various types of evolution paths after consuming a level 4 fruit. The first one was the atavistic type. The creatures that consumed them awakened the genetic memory of the bloodline genes, improved the original data of their bodies, acquired ancient talents of their race, and had an activation probability of 80%. The second type was the intelligent brain. After consuming the fruit, the human body undergoes changes in electromagnetic fields, allowing it to obtain abilities such as hypnotism, mind reading, and control over electronic machinery. The activation probability was 4%. The third one was the divine type, where the human body developed foreign abilities such as immortality, wings, and extreme speed. The reactivation probability was 4%. The fourth one was of ancient divine type. The consumer would obtain divine abilities such as controlling the weather, water, fire, and other substances, with an activation probability of 0.4%. While Tian Ran was looking at the system windows, his expression changed drastically to surprise as he was left speechless. He clenched his fist tightly, and while staring at the system window, he smiled and thought that both the intelligent brain type and the divine type were tempting enough, but the probability of obtaining atavistic evolution was too high. He crossed his arms, closed his eyes, and thought that if he reached the most useless evolution of all, the atavistic type, it would be a great loss. So he decided it would be better to ask the system. He asked the system if he could reset by eating a level 4 fruit and evolving into an atavistic type. The system replied that the host could continue eating level 4 fruits, and also added that if other types of evolution were activated after consuming the fruits, the host could choose to keep any type of evolution. Upon hearing this, Tian Ran couldn't help but smile and thought that, in other words, as long as he had enough divine gain fruits, he could evolve into the ancient divine type. As night fell, Yuan went to Zheng Hong's office. He turned towards her and, while staring into her eyes, asked if Tian Ran had accepted. She approached him and explained that Tian Ran had just contacted her and told her that he would send the application form tomorrow. Upon hearing this, Zheng Hong couldn't help but smile. He looked into Yuan's eyes and explained to her that the trip he had made to the south side hadn't been in vain after all. Yuan asked him if he was going to leave again. Zheng Hong turned around, put his hands behind his back, and while looking at the shelf, he explained to her that his superiors had already urged him enough, so he was going to return after finishing the case of the cult members. He also added that he had only come to the south side because he had been specially appointed by the Ministry of National Security to recruit special talents. Yuan approached him and explained that they had already arrested Congressmen Lai and Guo for over 10 hours, but the police department still hadn't taken any action. She also added that she had a feeling something was wrong. Zheng Hong asked her if there had been any movement from Wang Dongchuan. Yuan stared into his eyes and replied yes, advising him to stay on the south side for a few more days. Then, she looked to the side with a worried expression and explained to him that she was feeling a bit uncomfortable. At the same time, some small black bugs emerged from the well located in the cult members' hideout. Next to the well stood a man wearing a black suit, which was creating tension in the atmosphere. The small black bugs approached the man and started wriggling. This man was not human, but a mutant, as he had half of his face in mutant form. He began to stare fixedly at the bugs and realized what was happening. The next day, the sun rose and Tian Ran opened the gates of the estate. In his hand, he held the application form as he was going to deliver it to Yuan. He left the estate and started walking. At that moment, he looked to one side and was surprised to see what was in front of his eyes. Near the estate, a person's feet were dripping blood. At first, Tian Ran was paralyzed trying to understand what had happened. Then, upon closer inspection, his expression changed drastically. He began to stare at the person hanging there with eyes full of surprise. This person was none other than the girl he had saved when he went to the abandoned church. He couldn't believe that someone had done something so evil like this. Someone had hanged the girl and took care of placing her body near Tian Ran's farm to warn him not to mess with them. As the girl's blood continued to drip, Tian Ran threw the form on the ground and started running towards her corpse to check what had happened to her. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.